Hello and welcome to another Cork and Taylor Wine Podcast. Luke Taylor here. And I'm in a really special place with the gentleman beside me. We're back. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and also on YouTube. Subscribe, rate, and review. Also, if you want to support us, get us to great places like this, join our Patreon page, www.patreon.com, Cork and Taylor. And also, I'm very excited. I've got gas. We're so excited to have gas at the Cork and Taylor Wine Podcast. As an extremely effective and affordable wine preserver, we are excited to partner with Silvadore Brands as the official wine preserver. Open whatever you want, whenever you want. 100% Argon Silvadore wine preserver allows you to do just that. Go to silvadore.brands.com and click the For Your Home to order. When checking out, enter Cork and Taylor in the direct code and receive 10% off your next order. So that'll all be in the show links and whatever. Also, don't forget, the bracket is out, and make your predictions for the first ever Cork and Taylor Wine Madness wine tournament. Go to www.challonge.com/Cork and Taylor Wine Madness. And it's exciting. Maybe Pride will be in there. We'll have to talk to him after about that. But we've got some, it's going to be a great tournament. And this is going to be a great podcast. We've got Steve Pride from Pride Mountain Vineyards in lovely Spring Mountain. Welcome.
Well, thank you, Luke. Yeah, it's fun to meet you and get to chat with you. And
we'll see how that goes. So usually they don't say that after the interview, and no one ever does.
All right.
You know, one of the dumbest things I've ever said to Michael Keenan was, "Why is it called Spring Mountain?" And I've kind of figured it out.
It's pretty wet up here. We get a lot of rain. There's a lot of springs, and that is the truth. All over the property in the winter, the water just seeps up to the surface.
Yeah. Well, so we went on a little jaunt in your car, and we saw the property. I mean, it's absolutely stunning and absolutely gorgeous, to say the least. And you've kind of got a unique location. You're both in Sonoma and Napa.
That's right. Yeah, our vineyards are spread across the crest of the Mayacamas Mountains here between the Sonoma Valley and the Napa Valley, and the crest of the Mayacamas is the Napa-Sonoma County line. So, it goes right through the middle of our property and right through the middle of our crush pad. Mm-hmm. We have our Sonoma County fermenters and our Napa County fermenters. And
so you have to really deal with two counties then?
When my parents first started the winery back in 91 is when they got the licensing to start making wine up here. We are a Napa winery and a Sonoma winery, and we are fermenting our Napa grapes in our Napa fermenters and our Sonoma grapes in our Sonoma fermenters. And then we blend the Napa and Sonoma wines together to make Pride Mountain Vineyards wines.
Yeah. I find it very fascinating that this was your parents' retirement project.
I would say that's right. I mean, who knows?
That's a pretty
when my
big...
dad was ever going to retire, he always wanted to do the next crazy adventure. But when he said he had a business in San Francisco and said, "I want a weekend project." So he started, I was actually home at Christmas. I was in graduate school at the time doing science stuff. And he was looking at cattle ranches out on the Sonoma coast. He was looking at various properties. And when he drove on, he and I drove onto this place, and it was gorgeous. There were vines, and he says, "Yeah, this is, I think, going to be it for me." And what was really interesting, when we went into the old ranch house down to meet the owners of the place, the property was for sale. The person sitting there in his chair was his former personal physician from San Francisco. He didn't know that, a guy named John Gamble, and no relation to the Procter & Gamble type family, which is also out here in the Napa Valley. Mm-hmm. But that was kind of, my dad's mouth dropped open, and oh my gosh, it's John Gamble. So anyhow, so the place was purchased in around Christmas time of 1989 from the Gambles.
And it's one of Napa Valley's oldest grape producers.
This property?
Yeah.
I would say, there's plenty that were around in the late 1800s, but
just own it.
Grapes were planted up here in the late 1870s. I have a niece who works here at the winery who did a history project for us and really tracked those first 10 to 15 years carefully. And there were a lot of owners up here, but the grapes were planted in the late 1870s, and there was a break following Prohibition where fruit orchards, other stuff besides grapes was planted. But with the Gambles purchasing the property again in the 50s, grapes got planted again, and then we took over 30 years after that, and we're still here.
So what is Pride Mountain?
The location, the
wine,
brand,
everything.
the whole thing.
Give it to me all in two words or less. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, so we're a family-owned winery that's been here for 32 years now, doing our thing, and we're all, at our core, what we're all about. It's in our mission statement, and what makes us tick is trying to make people have a good time. It's all just about connecting with the folks that come and visit us here and sending them away a little happier, we hope, than when they showed up. And it's all about, there's no snobism, you have to have a certain net worth to visit us and have us be happy. No, anyone who comes up and visits, we're going to welcome you with open arms. Bring the kids, bring the dogs. It's all good with us. We just want to have people have a great time and discover our wines, discover the location up here, and it works for us. And we spill that over, that whole general spirit of make it. We like to think we treat our vendors that way. We treat our staff that way. We treat each other that way. We close a couple of times each year to take the staff and do some give back to the community. We'll
Awesome.
Help build houses or whatever the project happens to be. We do something different almost every November and May when we do that. And it just kind of sets the vibe of give back, connection to the community, and it's bigger than just us, type of thing.
And you can tell because people have been here for a while, 25 years, 10 years.
Yeah.
That obviously says something.
Yeah, two of our core people, Wendy Brooks and Tim Boucher, have been here for 25 years now, which is fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
Our 32-year vineyard foreman is just retired this year at age 71. Mm-hmm. So it was time for him to finally put his boots in the closet and relax. But and so the guy who replaces him is someone who's been on our vineyard team for 11 years and is just a great guy too.
Awesome.
So we're proud of the fact that we have our 17-person vineyard crew who's been with us for a very long time, and it just feels good that it's like it's our own little family, our own little community up here, and we try to make sure everyone's taken care of, and that's part of the reason of having the business too, just to
that's amazing.
keep the staff going.
So did you grow up around wine? I mean, were your parents big wine people? Well, I guess wino is
Less my mom. My mom was probably more the gin and tonics than the wine back in the 60s. But my dad from the very beginning, late 50s, early 60s, loved to collect Napa Valley wines. And so, I got stuck in the back of his little sports car as a kid and had to get drug around the Napa Valley in the mid-60s, and as he visited Souverain and all these old famous places and collected wines. And so, there was always wines in the house in his collection. Yeah. But it wasn't until Dad was older and was looking a little more for kind of a weekend retirement project that he said, you know what, let's go buy some land and grow grapes. And it didn't take him long to get the calculator out and say, why am I selling grapes when I should be making wine and actually making a little bit of money? So that was 91, and Robert Parker discovered the wines, I think it was the 94 vintage the first time he tasted them, and we got some really nice reviews from him. We got I think it was the 95 or 96 vintage. He gave us some 99-point scores, and the phone started ringing, and kind of then it was off to the races at that point. Can you keep up with the demand? Because of it really is the terroir up here that drives that.
Right. But I think your original winemaker has been on the Cork and Taylor Wine Podcast.
Bob Foley, fantastic. Yeah. Well, that's great. You think or
No, I know he has. I mean, I was there. I was there, and I was looking at a boar on his up on his wall in his winery. But
so Bob, he and Dad met. Originally, there was no winery here on the property, so the wines were being made down at Rombauer as a custom crush thing, and Bob was there and was tasting some of the wines that were coming off of this property. Rombauer was buying some of the Cabernet at the time and the Merlot. And Bob was saying, Jim, these are fantastic wines. So Dad said, hey, you want to be the winemaker? And they took off. And Bob was a great early presence. He was interested in everything from winemaking to grape growing. But what his niche was, and he was really a pioneer, was making wines that were riper than what people had been making. So he was on that early cusp of seeing what you could do by letting the grapes hang out another few weeks longer than most people were at the time. And it made a style of fruit forwards, easy in your mouth style of pleasant wines. He was already doing that at Markham before he came to work here. And so that started us off in a certain direction. And then my dad passes away in 2004. He got bladder cancer, unfortunately, and passed away. And so that's when I stepped in to take over. And Bob, around that time, was starting his own operation over there on Howell Mountain. And so it was just kind of a natural time. I mean, we overlapped for a couple of years, Bob and I. But we had an amicable split up as Bob decided to focus in on his own personal project. And I started to focus in.
It probably worked
on this project.
It sounded like it worked for both of you at the time. It was the right time.
Well, I'm a hands-on guy, and so is Bob. And yeah, it's kind of tough at the beginning. You know, I'm coming in kind of new compared to Bob, obviously, and I think there was no problems, but it was probably a good thing that when Bob left, we could rethink, and we hired a lady named Sally Johnson, who was just a great partner for the last 15 years in terms of collaborating on all aspects of how we can. So we started with the Bob Foley style of a little riper, and over time trying to bring, the harvest back a little earlier, bringing some more nuance, some freshness, some interest to the wines, and we're going to taste some later, awesome. And I think you'll see that. Again, not that they weren't absolutely delicious at the beginning, but my goal was, just a little more subtlety, a little less oak, and I wanted to see what this property could really do where the fruit really shines through. And I think we've gotten there. Sally took a job this past summer as the director of winemaking at Robert Mondavi. So, after 15 years, it's like it was a good amicable parting. She wanted to try a new, really kind of totally different thing than our little family up here, a more corporate thing, to see what that was like. And so we hired a new guy, Matt Ward, who was one of the handful of 3, I think, associate winemakers at Atelier Melka. And so he comes with a ton of experience from that. Atelier Melka is an interesting place because, I don't know, they have 50 client wineries. They tend to be smaller wineries. Yeah. But each winery for these young associate winemakers comes with their own ideas. Some want it in that riper style, some want it a little more European style. So your job as an associate winemaker is to make all these different wines for all these different wineries in different styles, different approaches, and you learn a lot. So,
do you see him, especially because of vintage? I mean, obviously vintages are different each year, and weather is different each year. Do you see him maybe utilizing that of maybe having a different style each year, or do you want to keep it consistent as the owner of the winery?
Well, we want to keep things consistent. Matt likes our style of wines that we were making. The only question is, what small little things can we do in the fermentation processes and various things to still eke out just a little more purity, flavor, whatever it is that we're still trying to achieve. So no, we're not looking to change style,
recreate the wheel or anything.
Part of the fun is that each vintage is different, but the winemaking behind those different years is pretty constant and more or less. I know a lot of people say that it's true. We want our winemaking to get out of the way of what the grapes naturally want to do and let some flavor from the grapes shine through. So we have low new oak levels and all that. And Matt's on board with that. He loves all that.
Good.
All that.
Did to talk about Bob quickly, and then we're going to try the Viognier.
Sure.
Did Bob ever try to get you to plant Charbonneau?
No, that was his own thing. That I never really chatted with him how he got into it, but no, that was a Bob thing after he left here.
Yeah, he never.
No, he had certain strong opinions. It's like, the property probably would have done well with Zinfandel. He's like, no, we don't do Zinfandel up here. We make a neighbor's wine. It's a Pinot Noir, and Bob's like, under no circumstance are we doing Pinot Noir here. So he had certain yes and no's, but it was the property screams out for Bordeaux variety grapes. Right. So that's
and Charbonneu's waiting to be a Bordeaux varietal, huh?
I guess so. I don't know.
It's going to be waiting a while. So So you make a Viognier, or some people in America say Viognier.
Yeah, no one says Viognier. maybe in Ohio there.
Maybe
no. And it was a passion of my dad's. I got married to a French lady, Laurence, my wife, in Beaune, France in 1992. And on that trip, Dad and some of his friends who were at the wedding took a trip down through the Rhone Valley, down through Condrieu, which is where Viognier, and tasted this amazing white wine that he'd never had before that trip, and said, "Wow, I got this property. I'm going to plant some of those grapes. No one's doing that." I think Argon was doing it at the time, but there weren't a lot of Viognier producers in California, and so they got planted in 1993, I guess, these Viognier grapes, and we've been making it ever since.
It's pleasant, very pleasant.
Yeah. So Viognier is a naturally more oily style of grape. It's what it is, aromatic. But what I love, and it really is a signature of our property up here, sure, it hits the palate that way. There's some weight, there's some roundness to it, lots of tons of flavor up front. But it transitions to some nice acidity. It's got some freshness on the back end. And that really is what all of these wines show that we're going to taste. And it's a reflection of the property. You get lots of sunshine up on our mountaintop up here, 2,000 feet elevation above the valley floors, and you're just bathed in sun from morning to night. Most of our vineyards face south, just because of the quirk of how the county line comes through right at our place, the crest of the mountains. And so we start warm in the morning with lots of sun. You get tons of sunshine, which creates, richer, fuller style of wines, lots of fruit presence. But our afternoons are cool. They do not get hot like they do in the surrounding valleys, and that allows us to preserve some acidity. When we measure, we'll do tastings of Bordeaux variety from the valley floor and from up here. Ours always have a slightly higher acid level, sometimes a lot higher acid level than almost any of the other kind of nice producers out there. And that's our site. That's our site up here. That's what you would call terroir.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think? I sell, as you know, I was telling you, I sell some wine in Ohio as a distributor, and I love Viognier, and that's a very, very, very nice Viognier, I might add.
Thank you.
What do you think the biggest misconception of American, maybe California Napa Viognier is? Because I'll take it out to people, and people are like, "Well, it's sweet. It's like, what's the?" I'm like, "It's not sweet."
Right. It's 100% dry. Always has been. In California, with any of the grapes, Viognier included, it's easy, given our climate, given our terroirs out here, to get things really ripe. And so what happens with Viognier when you get it really ripe, on the one hand, it's great. You get a lot of flavor. You get all this great peach and stuff. You get perfumey flavors too that almost get to be too much in a way. And I think people get turned off by kind of this overblown, crazy flavor profile. And then if it's too ripe too, on the back end, the alcohols will creep up and you'll get some retronasal burn coming through your nose. And it's like, that's kind of too big of a wine. And there were some vintages early on where we made them probably a little too much in that ripe style. But these aren't that at all. These have the upfront flavor. So the fun part about Viognier, the challenge of it, is it's probably of all of our grapes, it's the one that you have to get harvest really properly done. If you bring it in a little early, like we do with our Chardonnay, you can't bring it in at 22 bricks. It's not going to have any of that flavor. That'll be dead. It's not there. You'll have maybe a nice feeling wine, but no flavor. But then if you let it creep up to, say, 26 bricks on the extreme other side, you're going to have tons of flavor, but you're also going to get some retronasal. It'll be a little clunky, a little too viscous. And so where is that sweet spot? It's around 24 bricks for us when we bring it in. But it's a combination of tasting the grapes and measuring the sugars, and you got to get it to within that few day perfect window for it to come out really nice.
Do you ever use it like a 1% blending grape into your red wines?
We do. It's usually more at the few percent level. So we do a Syrah, and we do co-ferment some Viognier into the Syrah.
Why?
So the reason we do it is because I think it imparts a nice little floral note for sure at the technical wine side, the white grape Viognier provides what are called cofactors that actually make the Syrah darker and a little richer and fuller. It's kind of ironic that you put in some white grapes and the Syrah comes out richer and fuller, but that's just the fact of what goes on. That's less why we do it. I do it because I think there's this nice little floral note that comes through from the Viognier that I've always, we do some lots every year of Syrah that do not have any Viognier co-fermented and some that do. And I always tend to like the ones that have the Viognier co-fermented. We don't have enough Viognier to set aside every lot of Syrah that gets fermented. Can't have Viognier. But if I had enough Viognier grapes, I would do that.
Mm-hmm. I think we both agreed that Syrah is one of our favorite grapes.
Oh, for sure. We're a Bordeaux property, and I think anyone who makes Bordeaux wines really has fun with Syrah too, because it's so distinct. The flavors are so interesting and different,
dynamic,
different from the Bordeaux flavors, which we all love. That's why we do all these Bordeaux varieties. But it's fun to have a wine that's a little crazy. Grenache is like that too, where you can have some fun. And
absolutely.
Those Rhone varieties are fun too, because from we grow our grapes up here, and they're a little more challenging. They're not as easy to grow as Cabernet Sauvignon, which is probably the easiest grape of all grapes to grow. Still means you can still screw it up out there,
right.
but the Rhones are a little more finicky, a little more challenging. So it's fun to have that. I like having challenges; makes it a little more interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. So we got some red wines too.
Sure.
And I think it's, I believe you told me it's a 2020 vintage.
Yeah. So that it's this time of year where we're releasing, we're actually in the middle of our release cycle, and the vintage that's being released right now is the 2020 Reds. And so I figured let's just show them. There's some controversy about the 20 vintage.
Smoky, ashy, the
year of fire.
Year of COVID.
Yeah.
It's
so it was, roughly October 1st is when the fire hit us, or September 30th, technically. And 60% of our grapes were in. It was an early ripening year, nice warm summer, early starting, early finishing, but for sure a lot of the fruit was still hanging. Anything that was still hanging when the fires came through, there was so much smoke from these fires up here that we didn't use any grapes that came in afterwards in these. Just as an experiment, we made them into wine just to see. Just
for fun.
Yeah, and there's all these resin filters, you can try, but you tasted the smoke. So these wines, our 20 Reds, have zero smoke taint because the grapes that went into them were all harvested before the fire.
I'm gonna try to taste it and smell it.
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah, look for the smoke here. You won't find it. So the first one here is what we call our Vintner Select Merlot. We do 3 different Merlots here at the winery. This is the one that's 100% Merlot, coming from our various Merlot blocks here. And it's a small production wine. 500 cases is a typical year. And we almost got a full 500 cases in 2020 because all of our Merlot, except one block, was harvested prior to the fires. And so no cab blender in here. This is pure Merlot from our mountaintop. And that's why I kind of wanted to show it.
Wow.
And what you get here is what you would call a cab lover's Merlot.
Yes.
It's got some size to it. Our Merlot, with all of our sunshine up here, sees the sun. So you do get some fruit up front. Sure, it's initially a fruit obvious wine, but boy, it starts to build some structure. There's some definite tannin, not chalky, not drying, but some structure in there. It's a young wine, so it should show a little bit. And then, really, as a signature of our place, some nice acid showing through on the finish. It's got some vibrancy to the finish due to that interplay between the acids and the tannins that make it kind of a serious wine. This isn't Miles from Sideways, some wimpy, wine that has no character. This is a full structured, important
ageability.
Has some ageability for sure.
Absolutely.
Has some upfront appeal right now. But I intentionally chose this Merlot against the next wine that we're going to taste, which is our Cab, because in some vintages, like 20 here, the Merlot is even, I think, a little more structured than the Cab. We have enough blocks of Cabernet on our property that we can always find the few that go into our reserve Cab that are always going to be the biggest, most broad-shouldered wine that we make. And that was the case in 22. But the one I'm going to show you next, the third wine in the lineup, is the Cabernet Sauvignon that is 100% Cabernet, nothing else blended in. All of our others, 2 Cabernets that we make, have some Petit Verdot and some Merlot blended into them. This is pure Cab, but it's from a clone that does its own unique thing up here called Clone 337 that just makes a more gentle, soft style to begin with. Lots of good flavor, but since we were making a reserve Cab, we don't need this one that we call our Vintner Select Cab that we're about to taste. We don't need it to be the biggest, most tannic wine. And you'll see. Let's just taste it.
I've met Clone 337 before.
Okay.
It's very pleasant.
And it can do different things in the valley than it does on the mountaintop up here. That Merlot we just tasted is mainly this Clone 3 Merlot. And down in the valley, it's kind of the pedestrian grape. People tend to like this other Clone 181 a little better in the valley. Up here on the mountaintop, that Clone 3 rules. And I think there's a similar thing here with this Clone 337.
Dark.
Yeah, it's got
a very dark. All your reds have a dark characteristic, and
that's the sunshine.
And that's what you're kind of going for too, right?
Well, we don't have a choice. Well, that's what our grapes get. Yeah, we could try to hide them inside the canopy and keep them not exposed to the sun, but that sun getting on the grapes causes the darkness and the dark structures. Those are phenolic compounds. You get a lot of them when there's a lot of sun.
Wow.
Do you see on the finish? Instead of going really big, it kind of goes a little more on that silky, rounder, gentler side, I think. I mean, it's still a serious wine.
It's very multi-dimensional. Like it goes one way, and then it kind of goes another way, and then it kind of goes another way. Like it's very soft and velvety, but then you taste the tannins.
Right. They're there for sure. It's Cabernet. And it's a young wine.
And this is 2020.
These are all 2020s, yeah.
I taste no smoke.
Yeah, there is no smoke. Because all these grapes, there's not a lot of this Cab because most of our Cab was still hanging, unfortunately, when the fire came through. But we had some of our lots were in, and so that's what we're tasting.
Now, does that kind of change going forward when you pick the fires? Would you ever try to pick earlier or no?
No. Now that we've burned, now that the forest is burned, we're at a 100-year low still, even as it's starting to grow back. The chaparral and all the forests surrounding us, probably half of every bush out there was dead. So, it was tinder dry, lots of oil. What was green was loaded with oils. And so what I'm getting at is now that things are starting to grow back after the fires, it's starting to grow in. It's green. All the dead stuff is gone. Mm-hmm. So, the insurance people unfortunately don't know that the risk is low, but it really is. We're at a relatively low risk factor now.
You should tell them that. Maybe they'd appreciate it.
You
gotta love insurance.
Plenty of time. Yeah, I even had a meeting with the California insurance commissioner.
Oh God!
When he came out to talk to us, but but it's more the insurance companies. But that's a whole separate company. We don't have to go there.
That's another podcast.
That's another podcast.
Not a wine podcast, obviously. Exactly. That's really all the wines.
Yeah. So I intentionally chose 2 wines here, this Merlot and the Cab, that kind of buck the stereotype where Merlot is usually conceived of being a softer, easier, this kind of more gentle wine compared to Cab. And I think on this one, this vintage at least, you get that it's almost has more structure on the finish than the Cab, which is gorgeous, still a serious wine, just very inviting on the finish and isn't this huge chalky tannin guy.
God, no. Yeah. What are your thoughts about Sideways?
Well, I saw it when it came out in the theater way back in the day. Even that first viewing, that one viewing that I had of it, you realize it's like, wait a minute, dude, you're drinking Cheval Blanc at your fast food restaurant. That's a Merlot, and you know, 50% Cab Franc, 50% Merlot. And so, yeah, there was some irony there. But yeah, I was surprised that it actually did have an impact, I think, on the wine consumer, probably more than turning down Merlot. Merlot was doing its own thing in the marketplace. It made Pinot Noir just explode. For sure, I think anyone who watched the movie wanted to go out and try some Pinot Noirs.
Yeah, absolutely. I absolutely agree with you.
Yeah, Merlot. What had happened with Merlot is people found out in the '90s, like when Bob Foley was starting to make these Merlots in such an appealing way. Like he started with Markham and then with us. They're like, wow, this is great. It has the flavor of Cabernet-like flavors, but it's just so lovely in your mouth. It's a pleasant wine, and so it got widely planted in Central Valley locations and the Sacramento Valley, and you know, if you grow Merlot in a mountain setting at low yields, it's going to make one of the world-class wines, and it does so in Bordeaux, and it does so here in California. If you grow it at 6, 7, 8 tons to the acre, you know, in a place that has deep soils where you probably should be growing watermelon instead of or cantaloupe instead of grapes, it's not going to make such a pleasant wine. And I think that's what Miles was focusing in on. Was some of those larger produced, kind of boring Merlots that started to get made in the early 2000s.
I saw a sign at the gates for Pride Mountain that had a facial photo of Paul Giambatta, and he said, "This man is not allowed on the property."
No, yeah. I don't think we've had some celebrities through the years that have come through, but Paul never did. No, so I don't know him at all.
Yeah, wouldn't it be funny?
He would be totally welcome.
Wouldn't it be funny if he made a wine and it was Merlot based?
Yeah, he should. Yeah, it's a fantastic. But anyhow, I have no grudge against Sideways. That's just what it is. What it is.
Yep.
You know, one thing that we have here that makes our business really tick, that allows us to be a direct-to-consumer driven wine, is a tasting room, and we see a lot of people. You know, and people come up, and a lot of them say, "Okay, I don't need to taste the Merlot. Just get me to the Cab." And you always say, "Okay, just." You can spit it out.
Obviously,
try it. We encourage people to spit out the wines.
Yeah, but you got to try, right?
You got to try. And there has never been one person in all of these years, you know, how many is that, 100,000 people that have tried the Merlot reluctantly and not said, wow, that is a pretty wine. You know, it reminds me of Cabernet.
But wouldn't you think your wines, just the one Merlot we've had so far, and I'm sure the other ones are just like that, if you blind tasted the average consumer, they might not even know which is the Merlot and which is the Cab.
Well, that's why I showed these two in particular from this vintage, because I think most people would choose the Merlot as the Cab. And if you were told one of these is Merlot and one of these Cab, I think most people would get these flipped right now, just because the Cab is so silky in the mouth, and the Merlot is the one that has a little more gravitas, a little more structure. So depends on where it's growing and how you're growing it, and you know the winemaking side is pretty straightforward. I don't think the character of how these wines are showing is mainly driven by the winemaking. It's really mainly driven by the combination of terroir and farming. And farming, people don't appreciate just what an influence on finished wines farming does. Getting the light. And I did that experiment actually last year in 21 on the 21 vintage, where I took a few rows in this one block that makes some of our best Cabernet, and we effectively didn't farm it. We just let the vines do their thing all summer. No thinning, no leafing, no removing these shoots called laterals that prevent the sun. And we made wine in a small fermenter out of that. And then the rest of the block we did normal, 3 times through, making sure the dappled sun is always on the fruit from the beginning to the end. And my goodness, they were night and day different wines. They were both pretty in their own way, but the one that didn't get as much sun onto the berries was this kind of gentle, quiet, almost boring wine, and the other one was this big, broad-shouldered, rich Cabernet. And it's like, it makes a difference how you farm. You gotta pay attention to the details.
All right, so we do this little section while we're going to try the Cab Franc while we do this, right?
Okay,
We've got the Cab Franc, which is 2020.
2020. All of these reds are 2020s.
Awesome. So it's called Sip and Spit. You win nothing, you get nothing. It's sponsored by no one. I will say it's Silvadore Brands is sponsoring the Sip and Spit section. So I'm going to ask you about six questions, and they're quick. I mean, they're not really, but we'll pretend they are. your favorite vintage and your least favorite vintage.
Well, I'll start with the least favorite, and I still don't know why that is. It was the 2000 vintage. They just never had great character, and it was a slightly cooler, but not the coldest. We've had colder vintages that made better wines. I just don't know, and that's not just us. That's up and down the valley. 2000s wasn't our favorite. I will say this: I've had some of our 2000s recently. I like them more now than I did about 10 or 12 years ago. But so that's the least favorite. Favorite is a tough one. My favorite vintages, on average, tend to be ones where we get a lot of shatter in the springtime. And so what goes on? So the grape clusters are blooming, right? And you get a little rain, and so not all the berries form, and so you get these loose clusters. And so what happens is, during the growing season, each berry is surrounded by air and sun, and so you get a lot of concentration of those phenolics and all this stuff. But here's the key. Post-veraison, when the grapes start to ripen, when they change color and they start to ripen, they plump up, and you actually end up with bigger berries because there's space in there for them to grow. And so that causes them to also be, the finished wines to come out to be a little on that approachable, easy in the mouth side. So you get intense flavors with easy structure, and I think our 15s were great examples of that. 2008 was another great example of that. So those are probably my two favorite, 08 and 15, out of everything we've made so far. And for that reason, because of that shatter.
Biggest learning experience?
I don't know if there's any. I must admit, it feels kind of straightforward, everything about the wine business. I showed up, I was a scientist at UC Berkeley when I started here in 2004 after my dad passed away. And, I had to learn everything about farming. I didn't grow up growing grapes, but it's just been fun. So it doesn't feel like anything was a big hurdle, because it was also fun to learn all this stuff along the way. It didn't take me many vintages to be the person responsible for our farming up here every year, working with our vineyard manager. Probably more on the people side, but even that, our basic philosophy up here for people and interactions is hire nice people. Don't hire necessarily the person who's, the master somm who knows everything about wine to work in your tasting room. Hire a really kind, nice person,
genuine, yeah,
and then you can teach them about the wine. So that, I guess, even that really wasn't a learning curve. That just seemed common sense. So, sounds a little cocky or arrogant that there really wasn't much, but because it's been so fun to learn all this stuff, it doesn't feel like there's any obstacles.
If you could be one grape varietal, what grape varietal would you be?
I do think, even though I've got my passions for various things, we'd have to grow Cabernet Sauvignon up here. It's just what really sings on the property. So you would associate with a Cabernet Sauvignon. Okay. I would kick the Merlot off and do, even though that's our flagship kind of and what we're famous for, I would do Cab more than Merlot up here on our place. Yeah.
If they did a Hollywood movie about your family, who would play you and who would play your parents?
Oh gosh, I don't know, some geeky science type guy. I don't know, some goofy guy to play me. Who would that be? I don't know, Will Ferrell or something. He's not a science guy, but
right.
A goofball guy.
Right.
And then my parents, I don't know. Geez, Ozzie and Harriet. I don't know who would be, but they were both kind folks. Dad was a driven fellow. He had his visions about. He wanted to achieve certain things with his businesses and whatnot, but he was a big picture guy too, who sat back and understood how to enjoy life as well.
What's the best advice he ever gave you, or your mom ever gave you either?
When I would work in the summertime, so I was a professor over in France after I met my wife. I'm a scientist guy, I'm a PhD in geophysics, and I was over there doing that. But because you're a professor, you have your summers free. So I'd come back and work with Dad a lot. And this was all grown up. We would do outdoor projects. And one lesson that I really enjoy, that it's an important one, is when you start a job. So we'd be out with the backhoe, digging some trenches and putting in some pipe, and we'd be getting close. It'd be getting dark, 7:30, 8 o'clock in the summertime. And I'd be like, well, we'll finish this in the morning, Dad. Let's go and have some dinner. And he's like, no. And he's like, no, we're about 45 minutes from finishing. When you start a job, you finish it. Yep. And don't delay to the next day.
But that's the truth in everything, right?
Yeah, it is a good thing. Don't procrastinate. Just go ahead and finish a job that you start. And
yeah.
I wish I was successful with all my kids doing that, but they do pretty good.
Yeah,
they do pretty good.
If it wasn't named Pride, what do you think it would have been named?
Well, that was the last name of our family, of course. So that was why, and Dad had no shyness about naming the place. There is no Pride Mountain, by the way. It's Pride Mountain Vineyards. So yeah, but he wouldn't mind it probably if someone thought it was called Pride Mountain that had vineyards. But I don't know. Yeah, it was kind of, the original name, which is a great name. There's a winery on the property from an Old Stone
which
winery
you showed
that
me,
we
which
looked
was awesome,
at earlier, and that winery was called Summit Wines. And I think there is a larger
Summit
production,
Lake,
Summit something.
I think it's
but
Summit
that would be a
something.
great name because that really characterizes. We're up here on the summit.
You are.
We're up here. I would want a name like a summit that characterizes our terroir, which is a lot of sun and above the fog and cool afternoons, and that's what we get up here on the summit. So yeah, Summit. I'd go with that.
Sonoma or Napa?
Well, we're both, and we have more acres in Sonoma than in Napa, where we're here. I kind of, long-term global warming, climate change, all that. I'm happy to be on the Sonoma side. It's going to get warmer and warmer over the next 50, 60 years, and the closer you are to the coast, the better. So if I had to relocate, let's say you got to get rid of your property and relocate within a 100-mile radius, I would choose something out near the Sonoma coast.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Simply because I think you're more and more, right now it's Pinot and Chardonnay out there, but I think more and more you're going to see some Cab Sauvignon and Merlot growing out on the hills of the coast. But that's still decades away.
Yeah, we still got time, right? We still got time. Well, Steve, thanks so much. You're going to stick with us in a second. We're going to do, I'm just going to ask you one more question.
Sure.
But hope you enjoyed the podcast. This was an awesome, beautiful property, beautiful wines, beautiful everything, great employees. You too.
Yeah.
I mean, it's been a really great experience. Thanks for having me up here.
Well, thank you, Luke.
Thanks. Yeah. And don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on all your favorite podcast platforms, YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook. Don't forget to fill out your free wine bracket at www.challenge.com/Cork Taylor Wine Madness. And also, too, if you want to open that great glass of wine, you want to preserve it, check out Silvadore Brands. We'll have all the links and stuff like that. And we'll be back next week on the Cork Taylor Wine Podcast.